welcome to this explainer. Today we're dissecting how one single drone strike on the Mediterranean coast literally sent shockwaves through global energy markets and international supply chains. We're looking at a deeply localized event that totally exposed the hidden fragilities of our interconnected world.
Let's kick things off with a number that really sets the stakes here. $200 million. That is the staggering, honestly eye-watering cost for emergency shipping insurance buybacks triggered in the immediate aftermath of the event we're exploring today. Just wrap your head around that figure for a second. That is the literal price of panic in the maritime world.
And the panic started right here. On the evening of July 29, 2026, a massive fire erupted at Egypt's Damietta Port. It struck the very heart of the region's energy infrastructure and suddenly illuminated an incredibly fragile global system. When you look at the sheer scale of the fallout, you realize that one spark in the eastern Mediterranean meant the entire globe felt the heat.
So, Part 1, the Damietta Port Strike. Let's zoom in on ground zero.
At first, authorities treated this as just an operational glitch, a quiet effort to keep a lid on market panic. But as the Egyptian government confirmed the very next day, a drone was actually responsible. Now, Houthi forces officially denied involvement, and no other group immediately claimed it. But the reality on the ground was undeniable. A highly precise military strike had just hit a civilian energy hub. Here's exactly what happened. The drone directly hit the U.S.-owned Energos Winter. That's a massive floating storage and regasification unit, or FSRU. The inferno from that hit quickly threatened the GasLog Salem right next to it, which was a Monaco-owned LNG carrier caught in the middle of unloading operations. So you essentially had a massive floating bomb sitting right next to a massive floating match.
Which brings us to Section 2, the tech that actually prevented a total disaster.
Because a fire of this magnitude on two LNG vessels, it should have caused a catastrophic leveled port explosion. But as these massive ships drifted apart in all the chaos, an automated emergency shutdown protocol flawlessly kicked in. At just a 5-meter drift, all the pumps and valves slammed shut. At 7 meters, a mechanical dry brake completely severed the hoses, literally stopping liquid gas from pouring out and feeding the fire. And working right alongside that shutdown system was the ship's Invar membrane technology. Think of this as a razor-thin shield, literally 0.7 millimeters, thinner than a credit card, made of a nickel-steel alloy. Because it has practically zero thermal expansion, it flawlessly blocked the raging external inferno from ever reaching the highly combustible liquid cargo sitting at negative 162 degrees Celsius inside. It's engineering at its absolute finest. Moving on to Section 3, the geopolitical target map. With the immediate catastrophe miraculously contained, we have to ask, why was Damietta targeted in the first place? Well, context is everything. Just 48 hours before the strike, Iranian state television actually broadcast a retaliation map after a deadly Ukrainian strike in the Caspian Sea. They specifically targeted and named the Damietta LNG terminal on that map, identifying it as a vital and highly vulnerable gateway for gas heading to Europe. So this strike wasn't just out of the blue. It was the climax of a really chaotic regional timeline. We're talking US and Saudi strikes in Iraq, the broadcast of that exact retaliation map, ballistic missiles being intercepted over Jordan, and finally, the strike on Damietta. It marked the total, undeniable collapse of an unwritten operational truce in the region. Part 4. The global shipping insurance collapse. As the conflict map expanded to the Mediterranean, the global shipping industry went into an immediate freefall. The insurance void was practically instant. Major marine insurers, the ones managing 90% of the global fleet, abruptly yanked their war risk coverage for huge stretches of Middle Eastern waters. Without that safety net, at least 13 empty LNG carriers were forced to violently and immediately reroute away from the danger zones. And that insurance void absolutely paralyzed supply chains, which, of course, trickles down into massive real-world consumer costs. Shipping conglomerates suspended bookings and tacked on astronomical emergency surcharges just to cover the costs of rerouting all the way around the Cape of Good Hope. We saw companies like Hapag-Lloyd, CMA CGM, and MSC suddenly adding up to $3,000 per container. Because of all that danger and extra expense, commercial maritime traffic through the incredibly vital Strait of Hormuz collapsed by a staggering 81%. Over 60 container ships were left completely stranded at the Musandam Peninsula. They were essentially sitting ducks, just waiting for some sort of security breakthrough to let them pass. Naturally, the energy markets completely panicked. Brent crude spiked past $90 a barrel. And even more concerning, Goldman Sachs issued a warning that just a month-long shipping pause could send Asian LNG spot prices skyrocketing by 130%. So we were looking at a localized strike, creating an immediate, massive global inflation threat.
Now, Section 5, Egypt's energy vulnerability. Let's zoom back in on the host nation for a second, because this single strike violently exposed the fragility of Egypt's domestic energy grid. They've shifted incredibly fast from a gas exporter to a heavy importer, needing tenders for 160 LNG shipments by 2028. To process that, they rely on leased floating regasification units, costing around $3 million a month each, just to prevent rolling blackouts. That made the sudden loss of the Energos winter utterly devastating for them.
To quite literally keep the lights on, Cairo had to scramble. They enacted this highly complex emergency plan where they diverted an LNG cargo ship to Jordan's Aqaba port, regasified it there, and then expensively piped 100 million cubic feet of gas a day back into Egypt via the Arab gas pipeline for 35 days. An unbelievable logistical hurdle to clear. Which brings us to the underlying piece of the puzzle, Section 6, a fragile strategic balance. At the absolute core of Egypt's energy strategy is a massive 10-year, $35 billion deal. They import roughly 1.3 billion cubic feet of gas every single day from Israeli fields, specifically the Tamar and Leviathan fields, moving it through border pipelines. But you have to look at the massive asymmetry here. Israel can pause these exports during a security crisis without suffering internal blackouts. Egypt, though, they face immediate, severe blackouts and industrial shutdowns if that flow stops for even a moment. That dynamic makes their shared infrastructure a high-value target for anyone trying to exert regional pressure. All right, as we wrap up this explainer, let's quickly review the key takeaways. First, geopolitical targeting has clearly expanded right into the Mediterranean. Second, while high-tech safety systems are great at stopping explosions, these floating energy assets are basically sitting ducks without tactical defense systems. We also learned that total dependency on cross-border pipelines is a massive vulnerability. And most importantly, our global supply chain remains incredibly exposed to single, localized shocks. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question to chew on. As we watch local conflicts effortlessly paralyze global shipping routes, spike international prices, and expose massive national vulnerabilities practically overnight, is our deeply interconnected, highly optimized global energy network simply too fragile to survive modern warfare? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. We'll see you next time.